Each bomb represents a credited mission.
In looking at those photos, discovering how kind of crude the camouflage was.
They didn't start the line of bombs, at least on the left-hand side, with the first bomb.
It had the fan set pretty large and had the paint flow down really low. So it was just kind of spitting on there a little bit.
This gets lost a little bit in who was on the Belle and when did they get their kills and so on. There were 5 credited victories given to Memphis Belle gunners while they were on the Belle.
Typically with epoxy primer, you have a window where you can spray immediately on top of that epoxy primer and it'll bind with your paint. All of the stenciling from the Boeing factory on the B-17s, like the data block and all of that, all of the other stencils were not painted on stencils, they were water slide decals.
So now would be a good opportunity to talk about the combat markings we see on the Belle. So for those new to B-17s, what are the bombs, what are the stars?
So on the Memphis Belle, each bomb represents a credited mission.
Okay.
So there's 25 bombs, and the stars, the red stars represent when the Memphis Belle was the group lead. So on every mission, an airplane would be designated group lead, and oftentimes it would have the group commander or the deputy group commander on board to command the group during the strike. Now we know that the red stars mean that. What we don't know is what the yellow stars mean for sure. Some people have speculated that it's when it was squadron lead, but looking at the intelligence debriefs and the formation charts, they don't line up. What I think it could quite possibly be is maybe when the Belle was deputy group lead. So there would be an airplane assigned as deputy group lead in case group lead had to abort or got shot down. Now what's another problem with trying to figure this out is that, first of all, the stars don't line up the same way on one side as they do on the other, and the bombs and stars were not painted on all at once. So you have this situation where you can't say that's the first mission, second mission, third mission.
Yeah.
What's even more difficult is that they didn't start the line of bombs, at least on the left-hand side, with the first bomb. They actually started with about the 7th bomb, and we don't know which ones they added on one side and added on the other. So, I haven't been able to find out information on who's assigned deputy group.
Yeah.
But that's another thing that I certainly intend to research, down the road to try and nail that down.
Yeah, okay. So getting back to markings, and we'll talk about the War Bonds tour markings when we get to that point. But before that, they put the crew names all around the plane. That's not the case in its wartime configuration, but you do see that, Dinny.
Yes.
So what is that?
Yeah, so Dinny was the wife of the bombardier.
Okay.
So his wife at the time, her name was on the airplane. Of course, as we'll talk about later, there were many names added, but there were only 2 names that were painted on the 3 names that were painted on the Memphis Belle while the airplane was flying in combat.
Okay. And who, I can kind of see a little bit of animosity here, perhaps, that he didn't get his way in the naming competition, but he's like, I'm going to put it on there anyway.
Yeah, I've never read that, but I think that's, that could be some supposition
Hey,
there
man.
that could be true.
Soldiers will be soldiers, right?
That's right.
Continuing on with markings, Memphis Belle's unanimous for having that DFA or ADF. We know that's a call sign, but if you actually break that down, what does that mean in the unit order of battle?
Yeah, so this is another example of the Army Air Forces having a sort of standardized system. And in the case of the Memphis Belle, DF was the code for the 324th Bomb Squadron, which was in the 91st Bomb Group. Okay. And so each squadron had a 2-letter code, and then the A stood for its aircraft A of the 324th Bomb Squadron. Now there wasn't only one airplane that was A. After the Memphis Belle came back, or if an airplane was shot down, some other airplane would be assigned that letter code. But I could know, if I came upon a formation, I could look at these 2 letters and know, oh, okay, that's 324th Bomb Squadron. Okay. And then, like I said, the A was simply just There was a B, there was a C, there was a D, and
So how many
and so on.
aircraft or bombers are we running in a squadron?
In an ideal situation, there would be about 12,
Okay.
but sometimes due to losses, that could be a lot lower.
Okay. So essentially, you're looking at the alpha plane in that squadron.
Exactly.
Okay. And then, and other than obvious significance, the star in the blue circle, does that have an origin at all or a purpose?
It does. So at the beginning of the war, U.S. entry into the war, the standard national insignia was that, but it had a large red circle inside of it. And authorities realized that under certain circumstances, that could be confused with the Japanese aircraft insignia, the so-called red meatball.
Yeah.
So they removed that, and that became the standard marking through 1942. And then in 1943, they added the bars with a red surround, and then they took the red surround away. And so basically for most of the war, there was actually bars on the outside of these. But at the time that the Memphis Belle was manufactured, this was the standard aircraft national insignia.
Okay. So throughout the Belle's wartime service, that call sign and symbol, that didn't change.
It stayed just the way it was, yes.
And then tail number. Is that what is that, like a breakdown of that?
It is. So that tells me, I can look at any airplane and that tells me what year that airplane was ordered, and it tells me kind of where it was in those orders. So what the 1 stands for is 1941.
Okay.
So this airplane was ordered in 1941. It was the 24,485 aircraft ordered in 1941. And oftentimes, we see these letters, identification letters, but oftentimes in parlance, the airplanes were referred to by their last 3 numbers. So in a lot of the formation charts and things like that, like if I was talking about the Belle, I wouldn't say ADF, I would say 485. That's how I'd
Where we
refer
get
to it.
909 from, right?
Exactly.
That's a
Yep.
popular one. Okay.
I mean, chances of there being the same 3-digit airplane in a unit would be very unusual. It did happen from time to time, but they were typically referred to by the last 3 digits of their serial.
So getting back to the year of manufacture, how does that one tell you it was 1943?
So 1941.
1941.
So the way that it went was that the way they translated the serial number, because the serial number of the Belle, or the Army Air Force's serial number, is 41-24485. But they would typically drop the 4 because at the time kind of everyone knew it was 1940 because there weren't airplanes from 1931 flying in World War II. It's not like today where we have airplanes flying for 20, 30, 40 years. So they just dropped that first number.
Okay. And looking on the data plate, the actual issued serial number of the plane, is that the same number?
It's the serial number of the Army Air Force's serial number of the Memphis Belle is 41-24485.
Okay. And let's briefly talk about camouflage. Casey went through with us like how he did all that, but you don't see too many B-17s actually camouflaged that I'm aware of. Why was the Belle camouflaged, and do we know at what point was it sprayed on there?
Yeah, so this, the olive drab and the gray was sprayed on at the factory.
Okay.
And in the case of the vertical, it's actually, that was a sub-assembly that was done elsewhere. So that's why there's a slightly different shade. We duplicated that, although the tail was replaced because of damage during the combat tour. But that basic olive drab on top and gray on the bottom was a standardized system with the Army Air Corps and Army Air Forces. So the top was called dark olive drab, and the bottom was called neutral gray.
Okay.
So all combat aircraft in that time period were painted that way. But you'll notice these splotches that are on the Memphis Belle.
Yeah.
And they added a requirement to have medium green, which is the shade, the official shade, splotches, but they don't really describe exactly how that's supposed to be applied. So that's why when you see different B-17Fs, they have these medium green splotches, but they're done in different ways on different airplanes, which actually is helpful when we look at close-up photos, because it's almost like fingerprints on an airplane. We know which airplane it is. Now, eventually, airplanes, the paint was removed for various reasons. They were faster. The paint created drag because it's flat paint and not gloss paint. And also too, it added weight on an airplane this big. So, we see in 1943 going into 44, we see aircraft, bombers and fighters flying without any paint at all. Now, what's kind of interesting about that is part of that had to do with American aluminum. Not all aluminum could be exposed without serious corrosion problems. And that's why you see some countries continue to paint their airplanes regardless. American aluminum was made in such a way that it didn't have to have paint on it for corrosion protection.
Getting back to the green splotches, was that an infield mod?
I don't know. I think it was done in the States, but I don't know for sure.
And you're saying that was a unit directive?
No. So the policy for medium green splotches was an Army Air Forces policy that was applied to all combat aircraft at the time.
Right. And then the Virginia and the swastika there, not part of the War Bonds tour.
It was not. At Virginia was on the Memphis Belle when they finished the 25th mission. Unfortunately, in spite of myself and many other researchers, we have not been able to figure out who Virginia was. That name has no connection that we can find to the waist gunners, any of the waist gunners who were on the Belle. So that's another mystery to be solved. The swastika was on the airplane and represents a credited kill by one of the Memphis Belle's waist gunners. Bill Winchell, as a matter of fact.
So that leads us into a good. How many credible aerial kills does the Belle have?
That's a great question. So this gets lost a little bit in who was on the Belle and when did they get their kills and so on. There were 5 credited victories given to Memphis Belle gunners while they were on the Belle. There were 2 credited victories given to Tony Nestal, but he was not on the Belle.
Right.
And he only flew 1 combat mission on the Memphis Belle, and there were none of the Memphis Belle crew members on it. I guess the simple answer is 5 on the Belle, but if we include Tony Nestal, it would be 7. Now, those devotees of the Memphis Belle would notice that on the War Bond tour, there were 8 swastikas painted under the bombs. So where does that extra 1 come from? Well, that's courtesy of John Quinlan, the tail gunner. He was sure that he shot down a German fighter on a mission early in his tour. Sure he was. He was not given official credit for it. He even painted on a swastika on the top of the tail.
Oh, man.
And though I haven't found evidence that he was ordered to take it off there, it was very clearly painted over. And that's been duplicated for the restoration.
Wow.
And what's funny is he did get 1 credited kill, but in his mind, he shot down 2 German fighters. So when they started adding the publicity markings later, he was sure to add another swastika to the tail. So that's where that 8th one comes from.
So getting back to that original 5, during the war, they were actually painting their kill counts on the
They
plane.
were, yeah, they were. And you see another swastika under the navigator station on the Belle. So that was there while the airplane was flying combat.
Okay. And we're standing right under it, essentially. You can even see, they pointed out to us before, and then on the other side, the different colored tail. And you guys even brought that out in the restoration to show that.
So we did a very close study using different color schemes. It was kind of challenging because in the color footage, it depends on the daylight at the time, and the colors go all over the place. But even without the tail being replaced, which of course it was, since that tail was produced at a different location as a sub-assembly, there's no way to have paint match perfectly. So if you look at B-17s of that time, that vertical is always just a little bit different shade of olive drab. It's on every airplane, but the fact that it was a replacement tail, it definitely was a different shade. And we also see a different shade of olive drab on the control surfaces. So those are cloth covered
Yeah.
and not metal, so they have kind of a different appearance anyways. And to get the rudder, the color of the rudder just right, we ended up going through over 20 mixes, and that has 9 different pigments in it, and involved a very late evening one night with somebody who had driven up from Tennessee, mixing this paint to try and get it just right. And we think we've gotten about as close as is humanly possible.
I think so. I think so. So one of the things you do notice looking at the Belle is the camouflage, but if you can speak to recreating that pattern.
Yeah, so to recreate that was looking at a lot of photos, and in looking at those photos, discovering how kind of crude the camouflage was. You can tell that it's just somebody opened up a spray gun and just went at it and put random splotches all over. There's no set pattern like there is to later aircraft where it has to have this camouflage pattern. Yeah, it's just very random and very sparse in places. When you see an overhead view of the Memphis Belle, it's very odd, the camouflage is.
Yeah. So I would imagine you would have trying to recreate that as close as possible with like high definition photos.
Absolutely, yeah.
Did you try, I mean, you've got if you can talk about like setting your gun, again, for the technical guys out there,
Right.
like airflow, paint flow.
So had the fan set pretty large and had the paint flow down really low. So it was just kind of spitting on there a little bit.
Yeah.
And it gives you that kind of wispy, airy look because you're not trying to paint a nice solid surface. You just want it to kind of feather in.
Wow. Well, once again, yeah, you guys did a great job.
Yeah, and that was the thing, like you get the main body color all painted on, and then I'm going over the course of like 2 days with all different photographs and lightly drawing on with chalk, kind of a reminder for myself of where we're going to need to paint that.
Yeah, okay. All right, these wheel covers. Yeah, kind of familiar with 17s, a lot of us are. You don't really see them. I thought they were only on the Belle, but they are out there.
Yeah, you don't see them too much. In researching for the Belle, I saw them on some other B-17s, period photos from the time.
Yeah.
You definitely do not see them on all of them.
Okay.
We were not able to find original wheel covers anywhere. I don't think it's just a thing that lasted.
Yeah.
So we had to make the wheel covers, fabricate those, and then work off of pictures to get the pattern that it has on it. My take on it is it's just kind of like nose art. They had the wheel covers, they put the different designs on it. I don't know if it was certain units that had certain designs or if everybody kind of had their own.
Yeah.
For doing any maintenance or work on the wheel, that wheel cover is going to have to come off, and it has Zeus fasteners, which are kind of fidgety and hard to get. So that could be why people didn't really keep the wheel covers.
Okay. And then the paint job itself, that was on the Belle before the War Bonds tour.
Yep, that was while they were doing bombing missions. It had these wheel covers on it with that paint job on it.
And that paint job is specific to the Belle, though?
I'm not sure if it is or not.
Okay.
I don't know if other people in their unit also had the similar wheel covers.
So we don't really know why they painted it like that.
No, it's one of those mysteries, at least to me.
Someone knows.
Somebody,
Someone knows.
yeah,
Let us
somebody
know.
knows.
Comment here. Or even guess.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, like everything else, it looks right. It looks like the photos. So
Yeah.
great job. Yeah. So talk about the stages of painting an aircraft during a restoration. How are we getting corrosion and dirt off the metal? What are we doing to wash it? Are we etch primering it? What are the steps?
Okay, obviously before you paint, sheet metal's got to be really clean, free of oils and things like that, or your paint's not going to stick. So after everything's done, it's ready to paint. Everything got cleaned really well, and then we did an epoxy primer on top of the aluminum. We scuffed the aluminum first with a Scotch-Brite pad.
Okay, so you do have a binding surface to it.
Yeah, so we had to get some grip or some bite to the aluminum. So it got scuffed really well, cleaned after that to get all the residue off.
So your epoxy primer layer has overspray too. Is that the residue we're talking about, or?
No, just the residue from scuffing the aluminum.
Oh, right.
So you get, you can wipe it and you get all that aluminum dust on your hand, after you scuff it. So all that gets cleaned off with acetone.
Okay.
So all done by hand, just wiping with rags, acetone.
Yeah.
Clean the whole thing. Then epoxy primer. which dries really hard. And typically with epoxy primer, you have a window where you can spray immediately on top of that epoxy primer and it'll bind with your paint. But being such a huge airplane, there's no way to get paint on it within that window. So after it was epoxy primed, then we had to scuff the epoxy primer.
Oh, geez.
The whole airplane.
Yeah.
The whole airframe. So epoxy primer was scuffed with a Scotch-Brite pad. Then that's cleaned by hand with acetone, wiped down, tack ragged.
Jeez.
And then you can start putting color on it.
Okay. Now, is the colored paint, is that the final layer, or have you guys sealed it as well?
That's the final layer. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's just flat paint, and that's it.
Now, the modern paint that you guys used, was that an automotive paint, or did you have someone that was custom? Or?
It was custom mixed by Consolidated Aircraft Coatings out in California.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
And they do all of the, fabric, for fabric covered airplanes. They do fabric, all the dopes, paints, all that type of stuff. So this is one of their paint products that we use.
Okay.
Another cool thing that people may not know, all of the stenciling from the Boeing factory on the B-17s, like the data block and all of that, and all of the other stencils were not painted on stencils, they were water slide decals.
What is that?
So, did you ever build model kits as a kid?
I did, yeah.
So the decals, you soak them in water,
Yeah.
and then lay them on your model. It's the exact same thing.
That's what that is, really?
Yep. So, and any of the other placards you see around the airframe, they're all water slide decals.
Wow.
And that's how Boeing did them. So we had a company in Minnesota, Air Corps Aviation, recreate all the water slide decals for us.
And then is that sealed as well? Because I remember on the models as a kid, they peel.
Yeah, so those get just like a, I don't want to say lacquer, but like a brushed on little clear coat over top of those to seal them.
Okay. Wow.